is Sandra Brenes, and I am here to help you master sourdough. Why is your bread dense? Why does our bread, our sourdough or otherwise, turn out too dense? Meaning that it doesn't have like those little holes in it. And I think whether or not bread has holes in it, and whether that's your preference or like the perfect loaf, that's kind of up to you. I personally don't like big holes in my bread because the butter falls off and I don't like that. So I try to get ones with just like little holes. But if you're trying to get a big holy, not holy, holy bread, then these are some tips and tricks that you can try to improve the movement in your bread. So I need to mix up my starter, so I'm gonna work on that while I chat with you. I have a sourdough workshop growing my starter by like 10 times before this even ends. So the first thing that I would look at if my bread was too dense is how long it is taking to proof. So the proofing is what happens after you mix all of your ingredients together. That dough needs some time to double in size, and that's called proofing. I also call it the rest time. We want it to double in size. If you move your dough like into the refrigerator before it's fully doubled, then it's not going to have enough of that activity to be successful. And if you wait too long, then it's going to get more wet, and that's when it's going to like not expand. And so then all those little bubbles that are in there are going to deflate. And so that would be the first thing, is just to, it takes some practice, but the first thing would be to keep an eye on it. Once you have been baking for a while, you kind of know, you kind of can spot it. I think something that can be helpful is if you have like a plastic container that you are looking at. A lot of times when I mix my dough, it comes up to this point. So I know when it's here, it has doubled. And this is a different, when the dough has doubled, we don't want to wait until it kind of starts to deflate to do something with it. That's what we would do with the starter. So that is just something to kind of keep in mind, finding that right timing. It's not like super finicky, it's not to the minute, but it is something that you will definitely want to keep an eye on. Okay, so the next thing to look at if your bread is coming out too dense is how wet your dough is. So we call that the hydration. And so sometimes I have noticed that like in the summer when it's hot and it's humid, my dough is too wet. Even if I follow the recipe to the exact T, it's too wet. And so I always adjust. And so now we're in the winter and it might be too dry. And so we're always going to be like taking the temperature, the environment into consideration when we are working on our dough. So for example, in the winter, because it's going to take maybe a little bit longer to rise because our kitchens are a little bit colder or something like that, I may add more, a little bit more water to just prolong that. So if I think about water as like the transportation, and flour is like the food that keeps it like going and moving. So if you have too little of water, then it's not going to rise the way that you want it to. And if you have not enough, it doesn't have a way to get to where it needs to go. So I just like kind of always think about that balance in that. And again, it's with practice that you kind of like figure out like, oh, I need to add a little bit more water or a little bit more flour. So it does take a little, like trying it a few times and adjusting as you go. And really, even if your loaves are coming out dense, that you can still enjoy them and share them. So I wouldn't worry about it too much while you're learning what the perfect timing is of everything. So one is your proofing. If it's being proofed too long, then it's not going to come out quite right. If it's proofing too short, it's not going to come out just right. And so then hydration, number 2, if it's too wet or too dry. So that's something that you want to find that right balance in there. Some people have also said that it could be the amount of salt in your recipe. So that, if you're making like 4 1-pound loaves, the max amount of salt that you would want is like 1.5 tablespoons. I think that's like 17 grams of salt. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But so having too much salt will not give the bread the boost that it needs. There's some reaction that happens between the water and the salt and the yeast in the bread that allows it to grow at a steady pace. Too little salt and your sourdough might start growing really, really fast, and that is going to overproof it. And so then that's where some of that problem comes from. If it's too little, then it doesn't have the right balance of like conditioning in it. And so then that will also affect your final outcome. And then my final suggestion, so number 4, is if you've overworked your dough. So the technique that I teach is just forming the dough in your hand. I don't do stretch and pulls or the folds. And I just make my dough, let it double, put it in the refrigerator. When it's chilled, I pull out the bread that I want for the week. And sometimes when we're molding our dough before we bake it, then that can overwork it. And so then any of that like light and airy dough that we have now has become like compacted. And then it's like, we don't give it enough time during the next little rest time to expand. And so that would be my 4th little thing to look at. So 1, proofing, too long, not enough time at both points, the time that you're making your dough and after you have formed your dough. Number 2, hydration, if it's too wet, too dry. Number 3, the salt, too much or too little. And then number 4, if you're overworking your dough. And apparently I can't multitask. So this video is just all about this dense bread, but you can watch me as I mix up my starter. So here's Big Mama. You can kind of see where she's at. I pulled her from there. So I'm feeding, I pulled out like half of her to double. I've already added the water to this one, and now I'm gonna add the flour, which is about 4 cups. I'm making about 16 loaves of sourdough for this weekend. And so I wanted to get that nice and bulky. And really, it's been a couple weeks since I've made bread, to be honest. And am just using my starter. Also at the point that it's at. So I'm going to feed it kind of thick, because I will feed it again after it doubles, because I need about this much to make the bread, and then I need a little bit more to share the starter. So this is, I fed my starter very thick because it's cold in my kitchen. It's a little dry. I'll keep an eye on it. If nothing happens in a couple hours, I might add some water. But Big Mama likes food. All right, and then to feed my Big Mama starter, I'm gonna add water. I added water to about the halfway mark. I don't use a scale, I just eyeball it. Keep it simple. And that's gonna need about a cup. But when you get into your routine, like I'm making the same amount of bread, I'm pulling out the same amount of starter, you kind of can see where it falls. So things seem really finicky in the beginning of your sourdough journey, but as you get into it, see, look how right where it is supposed to be, or where it was before. So now this is my mark. I'm gonna let this double, and then I'm gonna pop it in the fridge until I need to pull from it again. So anyway, it was great to share with you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or you can join our community at communities.studiobhub and ask more of your questions. We have a lot of homemakers in that group. It's not specifically for sourdough, but just kind of this homestead, organic, natural living. So live creatively. See you later.